Hello, my name is Anthony and I'm from Team 6, and today we should be talking about unemployment. Our discussion today shall be focusing on unemployment in the next 3 years, and we shall be looking at the research and statistics behind it, the unemployment rates in the US and the EU, and we shall be looking at the challenges facing unemployment. We shall also be looking at the recommendations on ways to stop or mitigate the effects of unemployment on the global economy. So, what is unemployment? Unemployment is actually persons above a specified age not being in paid employment or self-employment, but currently available for work. So we shall be moving on to Jacob to talk about the research and the statistics behind unemployment.
Thank you, Anthony. Now, as you said, now we're going to talk about the statistics within unemployment in Europe and the US. The unemployment rate in Europe is 7.5% in 2020 and has not been this high since the financial crisis in 2008. Unemployment has not been spread evenly across European borders. Countries as Spain and Italy were hit hard, while Germany held its rate at a steady 3.5%. The European Commission predicts that the GDP in 19 countries that use euros will contract by 7.75% this year. We have chosen to compare the unemployment rate in Europe and the US. The unemployment rate in America rose to 14.7% in April 2020, which equals 12.6 million US citizens. This is the highest rate measured since the Great Depression, that was between 1920s and 1930s, which is considered the world's worst economic downturn in the history of industrialized world. The second week of January 2021, 885,000 US citizens applied for unemployment benefits. Before the COVID pandemic, the weekly numbers were about 225,000. Now Scarlett will compare Europe to US.
Thank you, Jacob. So, the rise in the US unemployment rate has become much greater than in Europe since the start of COVID-19 crisis. The primary reason for this is because the US businesses has increasingly suspended their workers more rapidly than the European businesses. This exposes the employment contract structure of the US labor market and especially highlights their greater ease in declaring redundancies. European countries generally make it much harder to dismiss their employees compared to the US, which experts believe makes the entire system more protective from crises, such as our current pandemic evolved from COVID-19. Europe has spent a great value of the fiscal ammunition on directly supporting businesses that have kept workers employed during our current crisis. For instance, 10 million employees in Germany would have lost their jobs if it were not for their short-time working scheme, which was applied after the 2008 financial crisis and is now being applied in other European countries. In contrast, the American Paycheck Protection Plan also intends on helping small companies keeping their workers. However, their coverage is much more limited compared to similar schemes in Europe. The American strategy is to channel most of its effort throughout the 2.2 trillion coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, and consists of supporting individuals and businesses rather than saving their jobs. Next, Ali is going to talk about the challenges we might face in the next 3 years.
Thanks. Now the question is, what challenges will we face in the next 3 years? In addition to the impending health concerns of workers and their families, the virus and subsequent economic shocks will also affect the world of work in three fundamental ways. Firstly, the number of jobs leading to increased unemployment and underemployment. Estimates collected by the International Labour Organization 2020 indicate that the global unemployment rate will increase from 5.3 million to 24.7 million in the future, which will increase the number of unemployment, thus giving companies demand for work different from the previous years. According to these data, the situation for the next few years will get worse and worse if precautions are not taken to help both parties in question, companies and employees. Secondly, the quality of work, in which we will discuss the acquisition of wages and social security measures. As mentioned above, the impact on the company's labor demand will result in a substantial reduction in wages and working hours. Although self-employment doesn't usually respond to economic crisis, it serves as the default choice for survival in many economic realities. Therefore, informal employment tends to grow during the crisis, which is what we are trying to predict in the coming years. The last but not the least, impact on specific societies more vulnerable to the negative effects of unemployment. The decline in economic activity and the restrictions on the movement of people have a measurable impact on the industry and services. The latest figures shows that by the first month of 2021, the total value added of industrial enterprises decreased by almost 14%. The global distribution chain has been destroyed. Services, tourism, and retail trade are particularly vulnerable. According to a preliminary assessment by the World Travel and Tourism Council, the number of international arrivals in the next 3 years is expected to decrease by 25%, which would put millions of other jobs at risk. Now I want to introduce my colleague Umaima, who will talk about the recommendation. The word is yours, Uma.
Thank you. So unemployment can be reduced on two sides, demand side and supply side. On the demand side, 3 policies can be applied to tackle unemployment. First off, monetary policy, which has an impact on aggregate demand and inflation across different transmission channels. Adverse shocks, such as higher oil prices, can lead to higher unemployment and inflation. Monetary policy would involve cutting interest rates. Lower rates decrease the cost of borrowing and encourage people to spend and invest. This increases aggregate demand and should also help to increase GDP and reduce demand-deficient unemployment. Another policy is fiscal policy, which involves cutting taxes and/or increasing spending, and can lead to an increase in aggregate demand and rise in real GDP. The increase in economic growth will cause increased demand for workers, providing employment and reducing unemployment. And the third one will be depreciation of exchange rate. The currency exchange rate has an indirect impact on unemployment because it affects the competitiveness of local firms and the cost of imported goods and raw materials. Changes in the currency exchange rate might cause job losses or grow the demand for employees. On the supply side, education and training could be given to give the long-term unemployed new skills which enable them to find jobs in developing industries. There could also be better geographical mobility. Usually the unemployed is more concentrated in certain regions. So to solve the issue of geographical unemployment, the government could give tax breaks to firms who set up in depressed areas. For example, provide financial assistance to unemployed workers who move to areas with high employment. And the last solution would be improve labor market flexibility. Higher structural rates of unemployment in Europe is due to restrictive labor markets which discourage firms from employing workers in the first place. For example, abolishing maximum working weeks and making it easier to hire and fire workers may encourage more job creation. Our presentation ends here. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.